I said it at my husband's retirement barbecue, with his friends sitting close enough to hear me and the man I was sleeping with drinking beer from my husband's cooler. I leaned toward my friend Nora, laughed, and told her Daniel was too stupid to discover an affair. I said he trusted me so completely that I could come home from another man's bed and he would ask whether I wanted dinner. Nora stopped smiling. Her eyes moved past my shoulder. Then Daniel's hand settled there, warm and steady. He was standing behind me with the calm smile he used whenever someone had finally shown him the truth. The people around our table went silent. Daniel did not ask how long I had been cheating or whether I loved the other man. He asked one question. It was the only question I could not answer, and by the end of that afternoon it had cost me my marriage, my closest friend, and the future I had already begun spending in my head. My name is Laura Bennett. I was 56 that summer, and Daniel and I had been married for 31 years. If you had asked our neighbors what kind of husband Daniel was, they would have used words like dependable, quiet, and decent. Those words sound ordinary until you need someone at 2 in the morning. Daniel was the person people called when a furnace failed in January, when a teenager's car would not start, or when a widow needed a railing fixed but was too proud to ask twice. He owned Bennett Auto and Diesel, a repair shop he had started at 22 with a rented bay, a borrowed compressor, and $600 his father left him. By the time he turned 63, the shop had 4 service bays, 14 employees, and customers who asked for Daniel even when their problem had nothing to do with an engine. He was not charming in the way my lover was charming. Daniel did not enter a room expecting it to rearrange itself around him. He listened. He remembered whose daughter was applying to nursing school and whose mother had started chemotherapy. He kept a jar of dog treats behind the service counter because some customers brought pets. Every December, he quietly paid for one repair belonging to someone who could not afford it and made the invoice say Warranty ADJ Wussment so they would not feel pitied. I knew all of that when I betrayed him. I also knew the less flattering parts. Daniel treated worry like a private chore. He believed providing an answer was the same as sharing a feeling. If I told him I was lonely, he suggested a weekend away and then answered 3 calls from the shop during dinner. If I said I missed the man I had married, he kissed my forehead and asked whether the roof was leaking again. For years, I helped with the bookkeeping after our children went to bed. I answered phones, mailed invoices, and learned which suppliers accepted late checks without charging interest. When the shop finally became successful, people praised Daniel for building it from nothing. Very few remembered that nothing had once included me balancing payroll at our kitchen table while our son had a fever. That resentment was real. It was also not permission. I tell you this because I spent months confusing an explanation with an excuse. I believed that if I could describe my loneliness clearly enough, the choices I made afterward would become less ugly. Rick Dawson had worked beside Daniel for 27 years. He was 59, broad-shouldered, quick with a joke, and comfortable taking credit for an atmosphere other people had created. Daniel trusted him with the shop whenever we traveled. Rick had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at our house twice after his divorce. He knew where Daniel kept the spare propane tank and which beer I liked. He also knew exactly what to say to a woman who felt edited out of her own history. The affair began 8 months before Daniel's retirement barbecue. At first, Rick and I only talked. That sentence appears in nearly every affair because it makes betrayal sound as if it arrived gradually and politely. Rick stayed late one evening while I helped Daniel organize old financial records. Daniel left to tow a customer's car from the highway. Rick opened 2 beers and told me the shop would never have survived its early years without me. I laughed and said Daniel barely remembered I had worked there. Rick said he remembered. It should not have mattered. It did. Over the next several weeks, he began texting me. The messages were harmless until they were not. A photograph of the first handwritten ledger I had kept became a compliment about my hands. A joke about Daniel sleeping in his recliner became a question about whether we still shared a bed. I answered because attention felt like evidence that I had not disappeared. The first time Rick kissed me, I had gone to the shop after closing to drop off payroll forms. Daniel was home replacing a broken latch on our garden gate. Rick touched my wrist and said I deserved one part of my life that belonged only to me. I let him kiss me because I wanted the sentence to be true. Afterward, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, sick with fear and excitement. I nearly called Daniel. Then he texted to say the gate was fixed and asked whether I wanted him to heat dinner. I told him not to wait for me. That was my first clean chance to stop. I did not take it. Within a month, Rick and I were meeting at a small motel 30 minutes away. He paid cash at first. Later, when secrecy began to feel normal, he used a company fuel card for meals and told me Daniel never checked small charges. I believed him because I needed Daniel to be careless. At home, Daniel noticed changes but did not accuse me. He asked why I had started keeping my phone in my robe pocket. I said our daughter Emily was discussing problems with her husband and wanted privacy. He accepted that answer and never mentioned it to Emily. Another evening, I came home after 10 and found a plate covered with foil in the refrigerator. Daniel had written Lyra on a piece of masking tape because our grandson had been staying with us and ate everything that was not labeled. I stood there looking at my name in Daniel's square handwriting while Rick's smell was still on my blouse. I threw the label away before I ate. Nora was the only person I told. She had been my closest friend since our children attended elementary school. I expected shock, then reluctant loyalty. Instead, she stared at me across a cafe table and asked whether I had lost my mind. I told her she did not understand what it was like to spend 30 years coming second to a business. She said being lonely did not explain why I had chosen Daniel's oldest friend. I said Rick understood me. Nora asked whether Rick understood me or simply understood how to use my resentment. I did not speak to her for 2 weeks after that. When I finally called, I told her the affair had ended. That was a lie. Nora knew it was a lie, but she wanted to believe I had found the remaining edge of my conscience. Her silence became something I counted on. Meanwhile, Daniel began preparing to retire. He had talked about it for years without making a decision. Then, one morning in January, he came into the kitchen carrying a blue folder and said his hands were telling him it was time. Arthritis had begun locking 2 fingers on his right hand. He could still diagnose an engine by sound, but heavy work cost him more every month. He wanted to spend time with our grandchildren. He wanted to restore the faded red pickup his father had driven. He wanted to take me across Canada by train because I had once mentioned it after watching a travel program. I should have heard love in those plans. Instead, I heard how late they were. Daniel said he was considering selling a controlling share of the shop to Rick. The rest would eventually be divided among 3 senior employees through a profit-sharing trust. Rick had been beside him for decades. Daniel believed continuity mattered more than the highest offer. I asked how much Rick would pay. Daniel named a figure lower than the shop's market value. I told him he was giving away our retirement. Daniel said Rick had helped build the place and the employees deserved stability. I argued for 20 minutes. My anger sounded financially responsible, but underneath it was something else. If Rick controlled the shop, he and I would remain connected after Daniel retired. Rick had already begun talking about the future as if it belonged to us. He said Daniel would spend his days polishing the red pickup while we finally lived. I began helping the sale happen. I reminded Daniel of every long day Rick had worked. I minimized arguments between Rick and younger mechanics. When Daniel questioned 3 hotel charges on the company card, I said Rick had probably attended supplier meetings and forgotten the receipts. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. "How did you know they were hotel charges?" he asked. The statements listed only the name of the hotel group. I had seen the receipts in Rick's glove compartment. I said I recognized the company. Daniel nodded and returned the statement to the blue folder. That was the first clue that his silence had changed. I noticed it, then explained it away. 2 months before the barbecue, Daniel found Rick in our kitchen early on a Sunday morning. Rick had come through the side door without knocking. He said he wanted to borrow Daniel's pressure washer before church. Daniel was standing at the stove making eggs. I was still upstairs. Later, Daniel asked why Rick knew the alarm code. I said he had helped me carry groceries the previous week and watched me enter it. Daniel said watching four numbers once was an impressive memory. I accused him of becoming suspicious because retirement frightened him. I said he could not bear the thought of Rick running the shop better than he had. Daniel apologized. That apology made me bolder. I mistook his refusal to fight without proof for an inability to understand what was in front of him. Rick did the same. He started parking in our driveway when Daniel was at appointments. He used Daniel's mug at breakfast. Once, he sat in Daniel's recliner and put his boots on the coffee table. I told him to move before Daniel came home. Rick laughed and said I still acted as if the old man could surprise us. Daniel was 63, not 90. Rick called him old because it made betrayal feel less like betrayal and more like succession. 3 weeks before the planned retirement date, Daniel postponed signing the sale documents. He said the accountant needed to reconcile several expenses. Rick became furious in private. He accused Daniel of dangling the future in front of him and then tightening his fist. I told him Daniel always moved slowly. Rick said I needed to push harder, so I did. That evening, I asked Daniel whether he intended to work until he died. I said the employees needed a leader who could make decisions. I said Rick had waited long enough. Daniel set down his fork. "Whose retirement are we discussing?" he asked. I said ours. He asked why my answer sounded like Rick's. I became angry because fear often borrows anger's voice. I told him everyone at the shop was tired of being managed by a man who trusted no one enough to let go. Daniel looked hurt. He did not defend himself. He cleared both plates, washed them, and went to the garage. The next morning, the blue folder was gone from the kitchen shelf. I called Rick and told him Daniel was having doubts. Rick said we needed to remind him publicly that the transition had already begun. That was how the retirement barbecue changed from a celebration into something else. Daniel wanted hamburgers, folding tables, and the people he loved. I turned it into a ceremony. I ordered a banner. I rented a microphone and speaker. I invited former employees, suppliers, neighbors, and customers Daniel had known for years. I asked the shop crew to build him a retirement chair from the bench seat of his father's old pickup, which Daniel had saved in storage. The chair was beautiful. The men cleaned the red vinyl without removing every crack, mounted it on a polished steel frame, and fixed a small brass plate to the back. 40 years. Still the hey man gia man we call. Daniel ran his call. Daniel ran his thumb across the plate when they delivered it to our backyard the night before the party. He asked whose idea it had been. I said mine. That was another lie. A young mechanic named Lewis had suggested it after remembering Daniel kept the old seat. Daniel kissed my cheek and thanked me. The kiss should have burned. By then, guilt had become something I stepped around. On the morning of the barbecue, Daniel was outside before 8. He trimmed the grass beside the fence, arranged coolers under the maple tree, and cleaned the grill twice. I watched him through the kitchen window while texting Rick. Rick wanted to know whether Daniel had mentioned the sale documents. I said no. He replied that after the speeches, he would tell everyone Daniel had chosen him as successor. Public expectation would make it harder for Daniel to change his mind. I asked whether that was too aggressive. Rick wrote, "He needs help letting go." At 10, Daniel came inside for coffee. He saw my phone on the counter. I turned it face down. He looked at it, then at me. "Are you happy I'm retiring?" he asked. The question was so simple that I became defensive. I said, of course I was. He asked whether I was happy about being with him or happy about him leaving the shop. I told him there was no difference. Daniel said there should be. Then he carried his coffee outside. Guests began arriving at 3. By 4, the backyard was full. Music played beneath the maple tree. Smoke drifted above the fence. People brought photographs of Daniel in grease-stained coveralls, beside tow trucks, under raised hoods, and holding the enormous catfish he had caught on a shop camping trip in 1998. Daniel moved among them with a paper plate in one hand and grilling tongs in the other. He remembered every spouse's name. He made a hamburger without onions for a former employee he had not seen in 11 years. The retirement chair stood at the center table facing the small speaker. People placed cards and envelopes on its seat until the speeches. Rick arrived late in a new black pickup. He wore a pale blue shirt I had helped him choose. Daniel greeted him with a handshake, not a hug. I saw Rick notice. "Big day," Rick said. Daniel looked toward the chair. "It is," he answered. Rick asked whether the paperwork would be ready Monday. Daniel said Monday would answer several questions. Rick glanced at me. I gave the smallest shrug I could. For the next hour, we behaved carefully. Rick stayed near the crew. I circulated among guests. We did not touch. We did not need to. Secrecy had given ordinary glances a private language. Nora arrived carrying potato salad. She hugged Daniel longer than usual. He thanked her for being Laura's friend through all the years he was too busy to notice when I needed one. Nora looked as if he had placed something heavy in her hands. She found me near the drinks table and asked whether Rick was the man in the blue shirt. I told her to lower her voice. "You said it ended," she whispered. I said it had been complicated. She stared toward Daniel, who was kneeling to listen to our grandson describe a baseball game. "Tell him tonight," she said. I told her not to ruin his retirement. Nora said I had already done that. I walked away. That was my second clean chance to stop in one day. The third came when Luis began clearing the envelopes from the retirement chair. He told me Daniel should sit before the speeches because his knee was bothering him. Rick was standing beside us. He lowered himself into the chair and spread both arms across the back. "Testing the merchandise," he said. Luis did not laugh. I should have told Rick to get up. Instead, I said the seat looked good on the next owner. Two mechanics heard me. One looked toward Daniel. Rick remained in the chair. Daniel came from the grill carrying a tray of burgers. He saw Rick sitting on the red vinyl from his father's pickup. He saw me standing beside him. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Daniel placed the tray on the table and asked Rick whether the chair was comfortable. Rick stood, laughing too loudly. He said he was keeping it warm. Daniel lifted the cards from the seat and placed them back carefully. "Some things don't become yours because you sat in them early," he said. I felt the warning. I chose to resent it. By 6, I had consumed enough wine to feel clever again. Daniel was at the grill with Luis and 2 former employees. Rick was talking near the fence. Nora and I sat at the center table with 4 other guests. The music changed songs, then stopped when the speaker briefly lost its connection. Nora leaned close. "He suspects," she said. I asked who. "Your husband. He has been watching you and Rick all afternoon." I laughed. That laugh is the sound I remember most clearly. It was not nervous. It was not kind. It was the laugh of a woman who believed another person's goodness had made her untouchable. "Daniel doesn't suspect anything," I said. Nora told me several people could hear. I leaned closer but did not lower my voice enough. My husband is too stupid to catch an affair. I could bring Rick into our house wearing Daniel's robe and he'd ask if we needed coffee. The woman across from me stopped lifting her glass. Nora whispered my name as a warning. I continued. "Do you know how many times I've told Daniel I was working late? He brings me dinner. He actually leaves food for me while I'm with Rick. That's how much he trusts me." Nora's face changed. Her eyes moved over my shoulder. I thought she was looking toward the grill. Then a hand rested gently on my shoulder. Daniel's hand, warm from the afternoon. Steady enough that I understood immediately he was not guessing. Around the table, chairs stopped moving. Someone near the fence called Rick's name and then seemed to regret it. The disconnected speaker left the backyard strangely quiet. I turned my head. Daniel stood directly behind me. He was smiling, but it was not the smile of a confused man. It was small and controlled, the expression he used when a customer insisted an engine had no oil leak while a black puddle formed beneath the car. "Daniel," I said. He looked at Nora first. "Did you know?" he asked. Nora began crying. She said she had known there was someone but believed I had ended it. She apologized. Daniel nodded once. Then he looked at me. He did not ask whether I had cheated. He did not ask how long it had lasted. He did not even look toward Rick. He asked the question that destroyed every explanation I had prepared. When did my trust become proof that I was stupid? No one moved. I opened my mouth. There were answers available to other questions. I could explain loneliness. I could describe years of dinners interrupted by shop calls. I could say Rick made me feel visible. I could accuse Daniel of marrying his work before he married me. None of those answers belonged to the question he had asked. When had his trust become proof that he was stupid? It had not. I had needed to call him stupid because the alternative was admitting he had given me freedom and I had used it to betray him. I was joking, I said. Daniel removed his hand from my shoulder, then explained the joke. I said people said terrible things when they had been drinking. He looked at my wine glass. The affair began sober. Rick approached from the fence. His face had lost its color. "Dan, let's go inside," he said. Daniel turned toward him. "Why? Is my house where you usually discuss my wife?" Rick stopped. The sentence moved through the guests like wind across grass. People who had not heard my confession understood it now. I stood so quickly my chair caught on the lawn. I told Daniel this was private. He looked around at the retirement banner, the crew, the chair made from his father's truck, and the man who had expected to receive his business on Monday. "It was private," he said. "You made it the entertainment." Rick tried again. He said nothing good could come from humiliating everyone in public. Daniel almost laughed. "Everyone?" Rick looked toward the crew. He understood too late that he had included himself with me. Daniel walked to the retirement chair and lifted the envelopes from its seat. From beneath them, he removed the blue folder I had not seen in 3 weeks. He held it out to Rick. "You wanted this signed Monday." Rick said they should discuss business at the shop. Daniel said they had been discussing business for 3 weeks. He opened the folder and removed copies of the hotel charges, restaurant receipts, and fuel card statements. He did not wave them around. He placed them on the table, one by one. The motel Rick and I used belonged to the hotel group Daniel had asked me about. Rick had charged 2 meals, a bottle of wine, and gasoline to the company card. The black pickup he drove that afternoon belonged partly to the business until the final payment cleared. Daniel said the truck's mileage log had placed it near the motel 6 times when Rick claimed to be meeting suppliers. Rick accused him of spying. Daniel said the tracking system was printed on every company vehicle agreement Rick had required the employees to sign. Then Daniel looked at me. He said the expenses had told him Rick was stealing from the shop. My defense of charges I should not have recognized told him the theft involved me. He had not known the exact shape of it until he heard me speaking to Nora. I asked how much he had heard. Enough to know the dinners reached the right address and the wrong woman. That sentence hurt because he did not raise his voice. I told him our marriage had been failing long before Rick. Daniel agreed. The agreement surprised me. He said he had treated practical care as if it could replace attention. He said he had often given the shop the best part of himself and brought home what remained. He said retirement had forced him to see how much of our life he had postponed. For one hopeful second, I thought he was preparing to forgive me. Then he closed the folder. "Those are my failures," he said. "They explain why you were unhappy. They do not explain why my kindness became your punchline." Nora placed her untouched wine on the table. She stood beside Daniel and said she should have told him. I accused her of choosing a side after protecting me for months. She said she had chosen my side when she begged me to stop. Silence had only protected my affair. Rick reached for the folder. Daniel pulled it back. He said the sale was cancelled. Rick stared at him. "You can't make that decision because of a personal issue." Daniel asked whether theft from a company card was personal. Rick said he would repay every charge. Daniel said repayment did not restore trust, and trust was the only reason Rick had been offered the shop below market value. Lewis moved first. He walked to the retirement chair, lifted it by the steel frame, and carried it across the lawn to Daniel. "You should sit down, boss," he said. Daniel told him he was fine. Lewis put the chair behind him anyway. Then Paul, A former mechanic Daniel had trained in the 1990s, moved his folding chair away from Rick's side of the table. 2 current employees followed. It was not coordinated. No one announced anything. They simply decided where they were willing to stand and sit. The small movements were worse than shouting. Rick looked around at men who had expected him to become their owner. He told them Daniel was allowing a marital argument to destroy the company transition. Lewis said Rick had used their money to rent hotel rooms. Another mechanic asked whether Rick had planned to repay the shop before or after he owned it. Rick told them to stay out of his business. Daniel said it was their business. That was why he had changed the succession plan. He removed a second set of papers from the folder. 3 weeks earlier, after finding the charges, he had instructed his attorney to prepare an employee ownership trust. Daniel would still retire from daily repair work, but the senior crew would purchase the shop gradually through profits. No single person would be able to use Daniel's goodwill as a private reward. The papers were not signed yet. Daniel did not pretend the plan was complete. He said there would be meetings, appraisals, and hard decisions. He also said Rick would not be part of them. This was not the future I had imagined. In the future, Rick described, he controlled the shop, Daniel traveled, and I eventually left my marriage with enough money to begin again. Rick and I had never said those plans in one complete sentence. People planning something shameful prefer fragments. A joke about the Canadian train. A comment about the house value. A promise that Daniel would receive a fair price. We had built a future out of suggestions, so neither of us had to admit what we were constructing. Daniel's question demolished it because it revealed the foundation. We had mistaken trust for stupidity. I told the guests the party was over. Daniel said it was his retirement party and he would decide when it ended. Then he did something I did not expect. He returned to the grill. He asked Lewis to bring out the remaining burgers. He told the children there was ice cream in the freezer. He thanked people for the photographs and apologized that they had witnessed a private failure. Paul told him he had nothing to apologize for. Daniel shook his head. He said a 31-year marriage did not fail through one person's perfection, but only one person had brought a lover to the retirement chair. He looked at me when he said it. Rick left first. He did not ask me to go with him. He walked through the side gate, climbed into the black truck, and drove away with the company documents still on the table. I called his name once. Everyone heard that too. Nora went inside and returned with my purse. She handed it to me without meeting my eyes. I asked whether she expected me to leave my own house. Daniel said I could stay. He would spend the night at our son Aaron's home. I asked him not to go. You already invited someone else into my place, he said. I'm only refusing to compete for it. He did not remove his wedding ring. A dramatic gesture would have given me something easier to hate. He simply sat in the red retirement chair and listened while Paul told a story from the shop's first winter. People stayed. Not everyone. A few neighbors left because discomfort is stronger than curiosity in decent people. But the crew remained. They ate the food Daniel had prepared. They gave him their cards. Our grandchildren brought him paper plates of cake. No one brought one to me. I watched from the kitchen window until the yard became dark and the string lights came on. The scene looked like a celebration again, except the chair beside Daniel was empty. Rick did not answer my calls that night. At 11, he sent a message saying he needed time to protect himself legally. He said Daniel was behaving vindictively and that any further communication should be careful. There was no mention of love. Daniel returned the next morning with Aaron. Our son knew enough. He would not look at me. Daniel packed clothing, medication, and the framed photograph of his father beside the original repair bay. He took the blue folder from the kitchen table. I followed him from room to room, offering different explanations. I said Rick had pursued me when I was vulnerable. Daniel said that was probably true. I said I had felt invisible. Daniel said he believed me. I said the affair had never meant I stopped loving him. Daniel said perhaps I believed that too. Every agreement made me more desperate. Finally, I asked why none of my explanations changed anything. Daniel closed his suitcase. Because you're explaining why you wanted more, he said. You still haven't explained why I had to become less. I knew what he meant. It was not enough for me to want Rick. I had needed Daniel to be old, dull, blind, and stupid so that I would not feel cruel for replacing him. I asked whether he could forgive the words if I ended the affair. He said Rick had ended it for me before midnight. I began crying. Daniel did not touch me. He said an affair could sometimes be survived if both people were willing to face what it meant. What he had heard at the barbecue was not panic, regret, or confusion. It was contempt. I had used his trust, the very quality that made our marriage possible, as evidence that he deserved betrayal. He said he did not know how to return home from that. Then he left with Aaron. The consequences were slower than the public moment. Rick was dismissed from the shop on Monday. Daniel's attorney documented the company card charges and offered him the choice of repaying them or facing a civil claim. Rick paid. He sold the black pickup 2 months later. He called me once after his dismissal. He blamed me for speaking too loudly. He said we might have had a future if I had been able to keep one secret. I asked whether he loved me. There was a pause long enough to contain the answer. He said this was not the time to discuss feelings. I laughed when he said it. Not because it was funny, because those were nearly the same words Daniel had used for years when work interrupted our marriage. I had traded one emotionally absent man for another, except the second one lacked the loyalty that had once made the first worth waiting for. Nora met me in a park 3 weeks later. She apologized for keeping my secret from Daniel. I told her she had betrayed me at the barbecue. She said friendship did not require helping someone become worse. I asked whether we could repair things. She said perhaps, but not while I still described exposure as the betrayal and the affair as the mistake. We have spoken only twice since. Daniel filed for divorce 6 weeks after the barbecue. There was no secret account, hidden fortune, or courtroom ambush. We divided what 31 years had built. The house was sold because neither of us could afford to buy out the other comfortably. I received my fair share of the marital property. Fair felt like punishment only because I had expected more. The shop did not belong to me. Daniel had started it before our marriage, and our agreement recognized its separate ownership while compensating me for the years I had worked without salary. His attorney did not erase my contribution. Daniel did not try to. That mercy embarrassed me more than revenge would have. The employee trust took nearly a year to complete. Lewis became service manager. 2 senior mechanics joined the board. Daniel stopped working on engines but kept a small desk at the shop every Thursday so younger employees could ask questions. His retirement became what he had wanted. Not disappearance, but a change in how he was useful. Aaron sent me one photograph from the final transfer ceremony. Daniel sat in the red chair made from his father's truck seat. The crew stood around him. The brass plate caught the light. 40 own years. Still thi hey an man jardui call. There was an empty folding chair near the edge of the photograph. I stared at it longer than I should have. I had spent months imagining Daniel's retirement as the moment Rick and I would inherit the life Daniel had built. I never asked what it would mean for Daniel to step away from the work that had given him an identity. I never considered that the man I called unobservant had spent 4 decades listening to machines closely enough to find the failing part before it destroyed everything around it. He had heard the changes in our marriage too. He simply refused to accuse without evidence. That was not stupidity. It was restraint. The last time Daniel and I spoke in person was after the divorce became final. We met at the attorney's office to exchange a set of house documents. He looked rested. The arthritis in his hand was worse, but he no longer curled his fingers to hide it. I apologized without mentioning loneliness, Rick, the shop, or alcohol. I told him I had made his trust into a joke because admitting he trusted me freely would have forced me to see what I was doing with that gift. Daniel listened. Then I answered the question he had asked at the barbecue. I told him his trust had never proved he was stupid. It had proved he believed I was better than I was behaving. I had called him a fool so I would not have to feel like one. He thanked me for finally answering. I asked if the answer changed anything. He said it changed the truth. It did not change the boundary. Then he left. The retirement chair remains at Bennett Auto and Diesel. Customers sometimes sit in it while waiting, but the employees say everyone gets up when Daniel arrives on Thursday. He tells them the chair is only furniture. They disagree. I live in a small townhouse now. I cook for one person and still make too much food. Occasionally, I cover a plate with foil before remembering no one will be home late. For years, I thought Daniel's habit of leaving dinner for me proved he did not know where I had been. Now I understand that dinner was never evidence of blindness. It was evidence of the home he believed we shared. At his retirement barbecue, I said my husband was too stupid to catch my affair. Then he placed his hand on my shoulder and asked when his trust had become proof that he was stupid. The question did not destroy my life by itself. It destroyed the lie that had allowed me to live with what I was doing. Once that lie was gone, everyone in the backyard could see the truth, including me. Daniel had never been the fool at our table. He was simply the last person there who still believed I deserved a seat beside him.